Okay, Mr. Essay, I say, prepare to be written. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Yeah! Yeah! And some of these, and some of these. Almost there, and done. Now let's see how it looks so far.
How's it going, 7th grade? It's good to be with you again. Today, I really hope that you guys have had an encouraging time kind of talking through habits and what that could practically look like in your life. I really believe that these three things, the Bible reading, the daily Bible reading, the daily praying and journaling, tracking with God's spiritual growth in your life, that would be a tremendous blessing, not just for the 2 weeks that this assignment runs through, but really for a lifetime if you're able to put that into practice. Now, for now, it's going to switch gears. We're going to move from habits, we'll come back to that later in the week, to the CAP midterm project. And we're going to talk today about two things. First, about the CAP 5, the ministry project. And then we're going to talk about when you put it all together into the full CAP assignment. Now, some of you might be incredibly ambitious, and you might have leafed through your welcome packet, your project packet, and you might have gotten just a little scared. I mean, it does look a little intimidating, but I want to encourage you with just these two things. First, it is not as much as it seems, and then secondly, you have done well over 75% of it. 3/4 of the entire project is already done. You've done that over the past 2 or 3 months as you've been working on those individual CAP assignments and their worksheets. Now, CAP 5 is all about ministry. It's all about ministries. Now, ministry is a word that we use to describe practical ways that the church fulfills its mission. Ministry is practical ways that the church fulfills its mission. Now, if we would take a poll in this class, we would notice that different people have different churches, and all those different churches have different ministries. They have different ways that they are pursuing their mission. And so before we talk any more about ministry, that's probably the most important thing to know. There's not necessarily a bad way to do ministry. A ministry is just simply the practical way, like we said, that a church fulfills its God-given mission. Now, ministry can look in different ways. Let's start with a biblical example, and we're going to find that in Acts chapter 6. Now, we talked about this almost 2.5 months ago, halfway in the fall, before Thanksgiving. But Acts chapter 6 is all about the church's first big conflict. What had happened was that there was a food program to help out with the Greeks and the Jewish widows. But as the apostles were listening to some complaining that was going on there, they realized that the Greek widows, the Hellenistic widows, were being overlooked. And that instead, they were only helping out the Jewish widows. Now, there are a bunch of reasons why this could have happened. It might have been just a practical thing. It might have been where they lived. It might have been a language barrier, that some of them knew the Jewish language and others didn't. Maybe there were people that were just doing something bad. They did not love the Greek widows like they should have. Whatever it was, there was a problem. There was a conflict. And so the apostles gathered everyone together. It must have been a huge meeting. And they decided to appoint deacons to lead this ministry. Ministry was the response to this conflict, to this blockage, this wall that the church's mission was hitting. And so ministry solved that, and the mission of the church was able to continue. Another example might be a little bit closer to home, and that is your church probably does a Sunday school class or something like it. And that is also an example of a ministry, a way of encouraging the people and teaching them. A Sunday school class is a ministry. Now, there's another word besides the word ministry that we need to know to understand this assignment well, and that is the word multi-generational. Now, the phrase kind of already says it, but multi-generational in this context is when the church serves more than one generation. So your 4th grade class is not necessarily a multi-generational class. But if your 4th grade class, Sunday school class, has a grandparent day, and they invite the parents and the grandparents and the whole family is there worshiping and learning about Jesus together, then that is an example of a multi-generational ministry. Now, in my church right now, Mount Calvary Church, they use the entire month of December, the Advent season, to do multi-generational Sundays. And so they would gather on a Sunday morning, and everybody from the youngest kid to the oldest man would be in the church service learning together. And Pastor Matt, he would adjust his sermon. He might use a little bit more objects. He might tell some more stories. But it was a multi-generational service. And we're going to learn through our paper that it is the best kind of ministry, that the best kind of ministry is one that is multi-generational, that serves more than just one generation. Now, a few examples, aside from the Mount Calvary one, is also in the book of Acts. There's two, and the first one is all about Timothy. Now, Timothy joins Paul probably on his second missionary journey. Paul's a little bit of an older man. Timothy's a little bit of a younger man, and Paul disciples him. And so there's ministry happening. They're probably learning from each other. They're serving a common church. They were probably together at some point in the city of Ephesus, and they are serving Jesus together, even though they are part of multiple generations. The second example also involves discipleship, and that is when Priscilla and Aquila in the city of Corinth take Apollos under their wing. Apollos was a very wise man. He was an incredibly gifted speaker. He was young. He was smart, but he did not know the full gospel of Jesus. He knew everything up until the baptism of John. And Priscilla and Aquila, they take Apollos under their wing. They disciple him. They teach him. They encourage him. And then they send Apollos off. Now, Apollos would have never been sent off on his own missionary journey had it not been for the multi-generational ministry that Priscilla and Aquila have. They could have chosen to hang out with people that were their age and in their season of life, but instead they chose to disciple this younger man, and God used them in very powerful ways. Now, for the CAP project, you will need to answer a bunch of questions, and I'm just going to read them off. And unfortunately, I'm not there to answer any of your questions that you have of this, and so I'm going to ask you to give it your best shot. But big picture here, we're looking for two paragraphs that, just like every other one, are at least 5 sentences long. But if they're a tad longer, that, of course, is okay. Now, in the first paragraph, and you want to read along in your assignment packet, you're going to want to describe how your church practically does ministry. Now just as a tip, you can find a lot of these answers on a church's calendar, on their website, or in a church's bulletin, or maybe on the slides of your Sunday morning worship service. But the questions that you have to answer in that first paragraph are the following. One, what ministries does your church have? It might be an adult Bible study. It might be a youth group. It might be a soup kitchen. It might be a food pantry. It might be Upward, a sports event. It might be a parent's day out. Whatever it is, try to list as many of those as you can. Now, I'm looking for no more than 10 to 15. So shoot for maybe at least 5, but definitely no more than 10 to 15. If you go to a church that's a lot larger, like some of you guys go to LCBC, you don't have to feel like that you have to write down all the events that LCBC is offering. Try to cap it at about 10 to 15. And the second question in that first paragraph is, what are some of the biggest events of the year? So again, to go back to the example of LCBC, every summer they have an event called LCBC at the Movies, and that's a huge event. Now, for many of your churches, one of the biggest events is going to be the Christmas Eve service. They're going to spend a lot of time talking about that, and a lot of people are going to come out to that. And so ask around, maybe even shoot your pastor an email or a text and ask him, what is the biggest event that my church has? Now, I won't be there counting the amount of people that were at that event, so just give me your best guess based on your first list. And then lastly, what events are multi-generational? So think back, maybe even go over the list of events that you have jotted down in the first few lines of your paragraph. Which events have more than just one age group there? So like we said, a K4 kindergarten Sunday school class is not necessarily going to cut it, but an Advent series that has everybody in church in the same space at the same time, that definitely will count. That is a multi-generational ministry opportunity. So you're going to write that up, not in a list form, just like we've done in the past few CAP project, in a paragraph form. And then we're going to move on to the second paragraph. Let me read what it says there. In the second paragraph, evaluate your church's ministry. So we talked about what they are. Now we're going to talk about, hey, how do you think that they are doing? Let's start the first one. In your opinion, how are the ministries effectively serving the people in your church? How are the ministries effectively serving the people in your church? And then secondly, is there a group of people that do not have ministries for them? So think about groups of people that don't necessarily have maybe a Sunday school class or a event for them. If your church has a youth group, then the youth, the teens, have events for them. If your church has a seniors group that meets once in a while, then they have a ministry for them. But maybe your church has some people that are disabled with special needs and they don't have a ministry for them. Or maybe your church has some college students and there's no ministry for them. Or maybe dads or men and there's nothing for them. So write out what people groups, what people do you have for them. And then lastly, how could the ministries that you do have, how could they more effectively serve the church's community and mission? So pick maybe one or two ministries, maybe the one that you see the most, which for many of you would be a youth group, and how could they do their ministry even better to more effectively serve the mission of the church? Now let's just zoom out and talk about the FCAs as we begin to wrap up. The first one is this: does my paper meet the formatting requirements? So is it MLA? Is it double spaced? You can find all of that on your worksheet, on your packet there, and we'll talk about that more in the days to come. Secondly, is each prompt included in the paper? Do I answer in my 2 paragraphs on Cap 5? Do I answer the 3 parts, the 3 questions that each one of them has? Number 2, do I clearly communicate my opinion in the conclusion paragraph for today? That's just that second part of the second paragraph, and then we don't have to worry about that 4th FCA. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. So for now, that is all. Just to give you a heads up on the check-in, you will have to jot down for me what are those FCAs. And then tomorrow we're going to start talking about what the entire CAP midterm project is. And so I look forward to seeing you guys then.